All right.
It's in 30 minutes.
Okay.
Out here, no time at all.
All right.
Because you've got so much information. That,
There you go.
All righty. All righty. So it won't miss, so it won't shift it. Let me button my coat up. All righty.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7, 8. 9, 10, 11, 12. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P.
You think you can make it all the way through there?
I don't know, man. I may have forgotten some of them.
A, B, C. Amen. Okay, Dr.
All right.
As always, this is your show.
All right.
So what we'll do, we'll
Okay, that
rip
pick
the
up.
thing, background information.
Okay.
That'd be the first 6 minutes.
Okay.
And then that second minute, we're going to talk about the status of race in America,
Okay.
part 2.
All right, that's good, yeah.
And so you've got all of that information that you know, because I don't have anything to add.
Okay, yeah. You can
Okay.
interject, yeah.
And then we'll do that. We'll run through that second segment and then that third segment.
Okay.
You know, and we'll get organized
Okay.
as we go.
All right, sounds
That
good.
first segment will determine what we can deal with.
Okay.
And that's that 8-minute segment.
Yes.
And then after that, we'll determine what we can deal with during
Okay.
that 10-minute segment.
All right.
All within the framework of race, the status of race in
Okay.
America. And I think
All right.
the information that we got the last time was very, very
Yeah,
important.
yeah.
It sort of gives a sociological view.
That's right.
In terms of what we mean when we talk about race
Right.
in America. I know it's been a rush day for you.
Yeah, it has been. You know how it is at the end of the semester. So we're getting close, another week.
Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the status of race in America, part 2. And we have with us to talk about the status of race in America, Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University. And Dr. Sanford, let me welcome you again to the show. And I think that many of our audience will, many members of our audience will remember when we talk about the status of race, part 2. And one reason we wanted to do this was because the information that you gave us dealing with the status of race in part 1, and of course we did not designate it as part 1, but there was so much information, and it was so much information that we felt that you felt constrained in terms of delivering what you thought we might want in reference to that. So we decided that you should come back and to give us some additional information in reference to that. And let's start off by having you to give our audience some information in reference to your background, your education, and some of your experiences, and then by that time we'll get into the second segment, and then we'll talk about the status of race in America, part 2.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here again. I am, again, EKSanford, a professor of Tennessee State University, Department of Sociology. I do it in reverse. I did a postdoc degree, which I think is going to be very relevant to our topic today on health and wellness at the Penn State University in Pennsylvania, State College, Pennsylvania. Prior to that, I worked in Washington, D.C. as I completed my doctorate degree at Howard University, which I did my topic on the homeless elderly, looking at social inequalities within the society in which we live in. But I worked on a victims assistance program with the D.C. Superior Court, looking at victims assistance. And I also worked with the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and we also had a victims crime assistance plan of action throughout the United States. And these were chiefs of African American police that throughout the entire country. But prior to coming to Washington, D.C., after spending 10 years there, I was in North Carolina, my alma mater, at North Carolina Central University, where I did my undergraduate degree and got my first master's degree in sociology. I also did some work at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, at University of Michigan, and I'm very proud of being one of the 25 scholars in 1995 that was selected to go to Harvard University to look at movement history, hence very much related to our topic today.
Very good. And so you've had an opportunity in a real sense to look at the status of African Americans or the status of race from many points of view, sociologically. You're talking about health and wellness and some of the issues that we're dealing with today, incarceration and et cetera and et cetera. And so that's very, so what would you say that in reference to sort of bringing our audience into what we talked about the last time you were here, how would you do that, bring them into our discussion?
Yes, I think to try to connect part one to this one, I think we have to reiterate the notion that race is such a fundamentally a part of the social structure, meaning every institution that make up our society, we find that it is so much a part of the culture that has been ingrained in the very fabric of our society. And as a result of that, it becomes fuzzy to many when we are just born in it. It's almost like a language, something that's just there, and you don't even realize that it's happening. But sociologically, one must contextualize, we must operationalize that this social construct of race because it is so present within our society. Now, if we visit another country, let's say if we were in Norway and just met someone and we walked up to them and said, hello, how are you? And they speak to you and say, well, what are you? And they would say, well, I'm Norwegian. But when you're in America, they have this social construct of race where they have put people into categories. And it's been that way since 1619 of enslavement for 244 years, leading into Jim Crow laws, leading into civil rights laws that had to come about to try to bring about a change. So presently, it is still so ingrained that those categories got meaning that people actually act accordingly. So we have to recognize it so that we can hopefully have a much better and humane society to bring about laws, bring about change that have been gradual, and we all have excellent evidence that improvements have been made. But I think on the surface of it, we have to understand, or let me just go beyond the surface, beneath the surface, the covert racism that is still present today still needs to be addressed, and we have to understand it.
And so in a real sense, we're dealing with an issue that everybody is familiar with. Everybody know about race, but nobody really knows, very, very few people really understand race when we talk about race. And we're going to take this first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. With incarceration.
Okay, that sounds good.
Because I think that's one of the one of the burning topics
absolutely.
today. And so if we can do health and wellness of African American, well, you know, the impact that it has upon race and et cetera.
That's right.
And then doing that final segment dealing with incarceration, policing and et cetera. And that impact of race within that context. And I think that'll be excellent information.
All right.
Two great bodies of information,
that's right.
I think, You didn't have any problem making it over here?
Oh, no, not at all. It's always a straight shot from TSU.
It is. It really is not that far. had Alana here earlier. And
she
was
was
dealing with Malcolm X and the Black Liberation Movement.
That's very good.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, she's talking about life and times of Malcolm and the Mecca and all.
Yes, that's right.
Hajj.
That's right.
Hey.
Yeah, she was on it.
Yeah, she. Yes.
30 seconds out. Stand by.
Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University, and he's giving us some information in reference to the status of race in America, Part 2. And Dr., the reason we wanted to entitle this Part 2 was to sort of buy into what you said in reference to the status of race, Part 1, in an earlier interview. And I think that people were so impressed with that information that we also understood at that time that you were able to deal with a large number of other issues dealing with this idea of race. And so we want you to feel free to talk about some of those other issues dealing with race in America.
Okay, well, and thanks so much. And in that first part, we tried to conceptualize the notion that in the very fabric of talking about race and race relations in America, that we had to understand the terms, that we had to be very specific in understanding, and from Part 1, how do you define race, how do you define prejudice, how do you define a stereotype, how we understand dominant groups versus subordinate groups within the whole interaction of human beings in everyday life. And with that, we can look back from a historical point of view. And in that historical point of view, we might look at a subject such as health and wellness, for an example, and can see how things were very, very poor for people of African descent for hundreds of years of enslavement. And then out of enslavement, from 1861, 1865, you have the Civil War. When that ended, and the Reconstruction era that went on from 1866 onward for a number of years, a decade or so, well, you still had health disparities, and people still had this notion of treating people of African descent in a very discriminatory, very racist, very prejudicial way. And that impacted health. Life expectancies were shorter for African Americans at that time, as they still are today. Birth rates were disproportionate, as they still are today. And if you look at the Centers for Disease Control or the National Health or Mental Health Institution, you are strong to see that all chronic illnesses, all diseases for African American population being 12% is still very disproportionate. Everything from heart attacks to diabetes to high blood pressure, hypertension. And so something is going on within the culture in health and wellness that still is a causal factor that's related to that. Now, I used to sit at the foot of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing in Washington, D.C. while I was working on my doctorate degree. And she would indicate this covert type of racism that in everyday life we would have to experience. And that was a stressor that would be a causal factor that could be related to some of the illnesses that permeated itself with this disproportionate amount of illnesses for African Americans. So we have to understand this as something that is true. It's a phenomenon that exists, and in understanding it, we might then be able to overcome it a little bit better, because it can bring some invisible, beneath the surface type of stressors in our life that could cause and have an impact on our health. And this,
are you saying that in the kind of violence that we might find among in the African American community, not only dealing with police brutality, but personal violence one toward another.
Yes.
Do you think that this has anything to do with what you call those stressors or whatever? Is there any kind of connection that sociologists have made in reference to this?
Yes, absolutely. This is a very interesting question that you pose. Dr. Leary and others, we referred to this notion of post-traumatic slave syndrome. That was one of the things I wanted to come back to do part 2. And this post-traumatic slave syndrome is connected back from slavery to the present. To say that how did all of that be passed down from one generation to the next generation to the next generation, even to the present, that might impact us in a way that we don't really feel that is impacting us, but it does. And that has very strong health-related issues within our community. It's not only that the dominant group see a particular subordinate group in a certain way, but that subordinate group might, say for instance, African Americans and other ethnic groups, might start seeing themselves in the way that the dominant group sees them in this very prejudiced way. And sociologists call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. We start thinking that that is a reality, while indeed it's not, but if you think it is and you act that way, then it has an impact. And that impact could be shown in health. And while we have so many issues related to high blood pressure, hypertension that might lead to heart attacks or diabetes or some of the other chronic illnesses. So she sees that very strongly within relationships. Now, one of the examples for the viewing audience to understand this, if you think about a group of people who've been trained in an institution of the military to do a tour abroad and in war. And when they come back, they might have post-traumatic stress from that short time that they are there. So we in sociology look at this notion of being enslaved for 244 years. Now this first group went over there for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, and then come back, and they feel like it was so decrepit that they still have some types of symptoms for something that they left, and now they are back home.
What about the 200 years?
That's right. What about these 244 years, then 81 years of that, and then laws that said to a person that they are this way? Now, how does that not filter into their psyche? This is what Dr. Frances Cress Welsing would try to indicate, as well as other psychiatrists and psychologists and social psychologists, sociologists, that this definitely has an impact on our mental health. And that mental health will then filter down to our physical health. And it has that type of an impact. But it's something that in many instances in everyday life we may not realize is there, but is actually in the very fabric of social structure.
Invisible killers.
Invisible killers.
In other words, these things are some of the things that are built in and psychologically a part of us, and a part of society, but we never can put our finger on it as having that impact, and we always look for something, some other kind of outside reason, without understanding that there might be a mental kind of connection to that. Is that what we're saying here?
That's exactly what we're saying. That's an excellent analysis of it. And we can see ramifications of this every day. Well, let's look at our President of the United States for an example. He's gone through the social structure. He's done everything in a very positive way, very competent. He's met all the demands of a Harvard and of getting a law degree from there and being the President of the United States. And then people, for whatever the reason, don't support certain policies and things. But so this has to be a stressor for him. And you might ask yourself, well, why? Because he might say, well, Ronald Reagan had the same one that I'm proposing, and the same group would not support someone that I'm supporting that did it earlier. So what's the problem? And so is this type of thing that's existing?
Yeah, that causes a real problem in terms of the mental attitudes and the mental outlook.
Absolutely.
And especially those individuals who might not be aware of that, you see. And so I think that that's very, very important. I think that that's a point of view that we ought to try to get across. And what we're going to do, we're going to take this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
This next segment, just to say that and then put it right into the incarceration or whatever else you want to do.
Sounds good.
Is this the last segment? This thing went fast, didn't it?
Yeah, this is 10-minute segment. Yeah, that's excellent information. Yeah, I Appreciate
No,
that.
I know sometimes so many things just go on. You know, we can talk about this, but you can see how through civil rights now, with the whole bathroom issue. See, they fit, that's just fitting right into this conversation.
That is segregation.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's where the whole issue started. In terms of separating
that's right.
restrooms.
Separation,
you know, are you familiar with The Help, the book The Help? My wife.
Oh yeah, The Help. Yes. I bring that up. That's right.
Yeah, well, why don't you bring that in?
Okay,
about this idea of different separate bathrooms and where did it come from?
Yes,
a lot of folks thinking this might be a LBG kind of situation.
It
started earlier
really
with race.
That's right, it did. Yeah. I wanted to bring that. I was thinking about that. I mean, from one time to the next, all this comes up.
That's right.
And that group of people feel like they're being discriminated against too.
Okay, but talk about that. Talk about
that'd be great.
These restrooms.
Yes.
That's very important. Because I know I've been subjected to it. Born in the South.
That's right.
Going and see segregation on one side. I mean, colors and whites and things. Why can't we all go to the restroom?
That's right. Yeah, we human. Everybody doing the same thing. You do a couple things and then wash your hands.
That's right.
You might want to comb your hands. All right.
Very good. Thank you and welcome back. Separation of these restrooms.
Okay.
That's good. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University, and he's giving us some information in reference to the status of race in America, Part 2. Doctor, let's see if we can pick up where we left off in terms of some of the psychological impact that race has in reference to that at your selection.
Okay, well, absolutely, and it does. It impacts us, and I would go as far as saying disproportionately, because it's indifferent, discriminatory type of treatment that a person might have to experience, and as a result of that, it can have a both mental and physical impact on a particular individual. Now, back at the time of President Bill Clinton, he commissioned a conference on race. And at the last part one segment, I was trying to remember Dr. John Hope Franklin, the noted scholar that he let head up that commission. And in that, he had one of my previous professors when I was at Howard, Dr. James Jones, and other professors, Dr. Jack DeVideo and Dr. Sue, who were noted scholars in the area of race at the time. And they wanted to go throughout the United States on these several occasions and have these discussions. And the whole aim of it was to increase knowledge, to try to change attitudes and behaviors within America to improve race relations.
These are the same ideas of the town hall meetings that we see that are going on now. Would that be on that?
That's the same type of a phenomenon. And he felt that if this happened, that maybe we would have this dialogue, because one of the problems in America is that it's been silenced. That whole thing that we bring up about hundreds of years of slavery and Jim Crow laws, we don't have a true conversation about it. And this, I think, is one of the aims of us having this conversation today, because if you can't talk about it in a truthful way, if you hide it, then you can always have the stereotypes, the prejudice treatments that are still present. So after they had that commission with that aim to try to improve conditions, because conditions were by law set in segregation. Coming out of the Reconstruction area, 1896 with Plessy versus Ferguson, made everything separate. It was supposed to have been equal, but it was totally separate and unequal. So viewers looking at us on television say we're two prime examples of people that grew up in a segregated America, and by law things were segregated. And and many viewers might look and say, well, that was back then and this is now. I can go wherever I want to. But when you think about what is going on very topical right now in our nation, throughout the country, is about gay brothers, lesbian sisters, and other transvestites making the issue and the argument of being segregated from being able to go to the bathroom that in their minds they think that they should go to. And this is it's become in social structure a part of the law. A civil rights type of an issue that others had to fight for earlier. So you've seen through economics that many companies are pulling out of certain areas. I happen to be from North Carolina. Here in this state of Tennessee, they've kind of put it on the board so they can hold it until another time, because you're talking about millions of dollars that will be taken away if this legislature does not vote in a certain way. The same type of fight that African Americans had to be able to go into certain places, this issue is going on in the same way. No different than the marriage issue between gay brothers, lesbian sisters, to be able to have that civil right was a national issue. And by law, the government and the law had to deal with it. You're hearing presidential candidates, those on the good side of it are talking about it, others are putting it on the rug again. But Dr. James Jones and Dr. Sue and this commission felt that we needed to have a true conversation about it, because if you didn't have that type of intellectual conversation, understanding the terms, then it would be very difficult to see the other side. But this is the same argument that African Americans were saying for those hundreds of years. We're human beings, the laws have to change, we have to go through a protest in order to bring about a movement to bring about change. And for the viewing audience, many of those types of things are really good, but we still have a lot of covert racism that exists within our society that we still have to work on. And some of that covert is this invisible type of nature of it that might impact us disproportionately in health. Another issue is that of looking at incarceration rates. Dr. Chauncey McIntyre has a book entitled Criminalizing a Race, and she looked back in history at the time of enslavement, where they would catch people that did not have the papers, put them in jail, re-enslave them, and then make them go out and do work on the chain gang or on the railroads or on making bridges or in cutting pathways through for highways. All of that is, and entitled it Criminalizing a Race. So when you fast forward it, we still see a disproportionate proportions of African Americans that are incarcerated today. And this is a sad state of an emergency, but race is still so much a fundamental part of inequality that it causes the very environment that people live in to act out in deviant ways.